I'm Francis Dearnley, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, as explosions are heard across Crimea, we discuss the impact of Israel's attack on Iran on the war in Ukraine, especially on drone procurement. Then we do a deep dive into Ukrainian cuisine, visiting a special charity in Kharkiv making salt, and interviewing a best-selling cookery writer about her family's remarkable experiences over the past century and the recipes passed down the generations.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Friday, the 13th of June, 3 years and 110 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by our Associate Editor of Defence, Dominic Nicholls, and author Olia Hercules. But first, over to Dom for the latest on the military situation.
Let's start in Crimea. Explosions were heard across Crimea earlier today, including in the southern cities of Sevastopol and Simferopol. This comes from the pro-Ukrainian Crimean Wind Telegram channel. They say Artesh partisans reported precise hits, their words, against Russian military facilities near Simferopol. They said, our agents report that due to Russian commanders' negligence, valuable equipment was damaged, probably an air defence missile system. They put that post out on Telegram. Now, Russia's defence ministry didn't say much, but they said their air defences had shot down 125 Ukrainian drones last night, including 70 over Crimea and 7 over the Black Sea. They didn't make any specific comment about these alleged attacks, and there's been no comment, as expected, from Ukrainian authorities either. However, Crimean Wind shared a photo of smoke rising above a local power station and from the village of Perivalny, that's about 10 km southeast of Simferopol. There were blasts also reported in the west and the far east of the peninsula. Across the rest of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Air Force said Russia had attacked with 55 Shahed-type drones and 4 Iskander-M or KN-23, that's the North Korean variant, KN-23 ballistic missiles launched from Russian territory last night. Wider strikes across that country, mainly in that swathe we talk about from the kind of northeast through the east to the south, killed 4, injured many more. On the ground, almost no movement. There are conflicting reports from the area about 30 km to the southwest of Pokrovsk in the Donbass. The US-based think tank Institute for the Study of War, citing geolocated footage published a couple of days ago, say that some Russian forces have crossed the Donetsk, and thank you for reminding me how to pronounce it properly, Daniel, the Donetsk-Dnipropetrovsk Oblast border just northwest of the village of Novokrainka on the T0428 road. But we don't know what those elements are or the strength, and that reporting, those movements, are not borne out by Deep State, which are another very good open source intelligent OSINT or OSINT, if you want to be particular, account. Now, I'm not saying that this movement doesn't matter. Of course it does, but these are still very marginal gains at great cost to Russia. More on those numbers shortly. But the reason we're giving it so much focus, I think, is because of the Oblast boundary into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, so we just got to get it into perspective. Now, thanks, Juan. President Zelensky, speaking yesterday, said that Ukraine had secured a 3-year agreement with Germany over an unspecified number of Iris-T air defence systems. This is a very modern air defence system, one of which I saw a couple of weeks ago, or last week, in Odessa. When I pointed out to our hosts, a local air defence unit, I said, is that Iris-T? They said, don't look at that. Oh, right, OK, fair enough. Fair enough, but I think it was. Anyway, German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius pledged an additional 1.9 billion, big B, billion euros, that's just over $2 billion US dollars, for this year. That's on top of the previously agreed amount of 7 billion euros, just over $8 billion US dollars, which brings German support to a total of 9 billion, all yet to be approved by the German Bundestag. So that's nearly $10.5 billion, all yet to be approved, but almost certainly going to go through. Would be a major setback for Friedrich Merz, new German Chancellor, if it didn't. Now, I said something about the numbers a moment ago, so let's just go back to that remarkable figure yesterday that Russian casualty figure has passed 1 million since the start of the full-scale invasion. It's worth looking a little bit deeper at the rate of change, I think. So yesterday, Ukraine's General Staff said Russia had sustained 628,000 casualties since January 2024, which obviously indicates a hugely increased rate of attrition from the start of the full-scale invasion. Casualties, remember, being killed, wounded, taken prisoner, or gone missing. Now, Ukraine's General Staff said that Russia suffered just over 100,000 casualties in 2022, just over 250,000 in 2023, and over 430,000 in 2024. Broken down by casualties per day, that's gone up from 340 in 2022, 693 the following year, 1,177 last year, and so far this year alone, only halfway through, obviously, 1,286. So a hugely increased rate of casualties being taken by Russia there. Now, I think there's a number of factors here. The loss of manoeuvre and the consequent rise in these meat assaults being number one, the lack of quality trained soldiers, also the lack of armoured vehicles, and then this explosion in the quantity, technical capability, precision, range, and the lethality of drones. So all those things together, I think, have added up to this hugely increased rate of casualties for Russia. I don't think Russia is going to be able to turn around any of those factors in the short term, which for me would be about 18 months to 2 years. So I think it is a very significant occurrence. Now, of course, Ukraine is experiencing many of these factors too, but Kyiv's focus at the moment, their fight is much more defensive. Their aim is to hold the line rather than try to advance. I think any significant advance other than local counterattacks is basically a military aspiration simply beyond them right now. So I would venture that this battlefield reality, as ugly as it is, favours Ukraine right now. So Putin, we know, is content with the minimal advance. He cares nothing for the cost. He's pinning all his hopes on the possibility that the resilience of Ukraine and external supporters will waver and break before his economy does and before his society really starts asking questions, as he did over the war in Afghanistan, or the patience of the oligarchs and the Siloviki finally cracks. I do wonder. I'm looking for signs. There are none, or very few, to be fair, at the moment. I'm looking for signs when these people are going to decide that Putin is no longer good for business and their personal crusades of making themselves absolutely stinking rich. I wonder when they're going to bore of not being able to play on their yachts and on their mistresses in Cap d'Antibes and etc., etc. And I wonder if that will make them decide to make a move. We are not there yet, but for how much longer? How much longer are you going to put up with this situation, boys? And that's us up to date, Francis.
Well, thanks very much, Dom. In yesterday's episode, I talked about how the decision by the United States to withdraw its citizens from key bases in the Middle East was indicative that they had intelligence of the high probability of an attack by Israel on Iran. And so it's proved in quite extraordinary fashion in the last 24 hours, with Israel launching a considerable operation overnight, codenamed Operation Rising Lion, which saw 200 warplanes hit 100 targets, striking Iran's nuclear facilities, wiping out dozens of its air defence systems and assassinating its military top brass. They claim the regime in Tehran had enough material to build 15 nuclear bombs within days when justifying the attack. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, said, "We are at a decisive moment in Israel's history, defending the free world from the terrorism and barbarism that Iran fosters and exports across the globe." President Donald Trump has told Iran today to make a deal over its programme or there will be nothing left. Now, many believe this could be the start of a regional war, which, as we discussed yesterday, could have considerable implications for the Ukraine theatre, just as we saw after the October 7th attacks, as the diplomatic and military bandwidth of Western nations becomes stretched. We've already reported in the past week that anti-drone technology intended for Ukraine was redeployed to the Middle East by the United States. Perhaps more evidence they knew what was coming, or also conceivably a reaction to Operation Spider's Web. That's one for future historians to solve definitively. Now, on the subject of drones, lots of media this morning have got very excited, with television presenters saying things like, Iran has retaliated by firing 100 Shahed drones towards Israel. when that's only about 40% of what Russia uses to attack Ukraine almost every day. And it speaks to just how accustomed people have become to what is happening in Ukraine, or their ignorance of it. Now, as you'll know, Iran has been a key drone supplier and ally of the Russians, and some are already speculating what the impact of this Israeli operation could be on Russian drone capability. Will Iran be able to afford to sell Shaheeds to Moscow? Will there be a tightening of sanctions which could impact the selling of parts for drones across the world? The jury is out, although I saw one expert this morning say Moscow has already worked to ensure there are multiple channels for manufacturing and purchasing drones, and so it's unlikely to have a measurable impact. But it's one for us to watch. Now, also in yesterday's political updates, I focused on the US, and in today's, I want to zoom in on NATO and Europe more specifically. Our very own Joe Barnes and Tony Diver have written an exclusive piece for The Telegraph looking into the reasons why the next NATO summit communique will reportedly only be 1 page long compared to the 90 paragraphs signed by leaders at the summit in Vilnius in 2023. It was something that Secretary-General Mark Rutte referenced at the event at Chatham House I attended on Tuesday, rather offhandedly. Well, apparently, its brevity is to avoid sparking a row between Europe and Trump, with the simplified statement only containing about 5 or 6 paragraphs detailing how the Western military alliance will meet Trump's demand to increase defence spending to 5% of GDP, and deliberately kept short because of the president's attention span. So the Telegraph understands the document will brand Russia as a threat to NATO, as well as offer a nod to the alliance's support for Ukraine, but will strip out any mention of Kyiv's irreversible path to membership, although Mark Rutte did reference that and say it was still the case at the event on Tuesday. And it will also remove any mention of climate change, posing a defining challenge to member states. Also, there will unlikely be any language accusing China of being a decisive enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine. As Joe and Tony write, the conciseness of the statement is purely designed to prevent rows from breaking out between Trump and his counterparts in Canada and Europe. European leaders have been barred from bringing up the issue of trade tariffs in a further bid to maintain harmony with the president. The White House chief is known for preferring short, sharp briefings, with his aides keeping their memos to a single page of A4. Now, we have become accustomed to this adaptation by Western leaders by now, but nonetheless, we have to continue raising them rather than seeing this as a normal event. Now, another story Joe has been working on returns to the subject of the EU's defence spending, with France apparently continuing to shut out British arms firms from the EU's defence industrial programme despite the post-Brexit reset. A diplomatic source told The Telegraph that Paris was seeking to restrict member states looking to make a purchase under the scheme to weapons made mostly within the bloc, something we've talked about before. Now, just for context, the European Defence Industry Programme is being touted by the Commission as the largest overhaul of the continent's industrial base. It will see the EU cash pumped into joint procurement projects and the production of weapons, ammunition and other military hardware. But the French seemingly want Britain out of it. Partly, it seems for ideological reasons, apparently, but no doubt there's also a considerable element of self-interest here, because France has its own defence industry, which is seen in many sectors as a rival to Britain's. It's not a great look, given the precariousness of the defence situation at the moment, at a time when you have NATO's Secretary-General saying that unless NATO allies work together, it would be better if they learned Russian. Those are the stark remarks that we heard on Tuesday. So an interesting story, and one we will continue to monitor. But finally, I just want to return to Hungary, where a scandal has erupted after a German-Hungarian media stalwart, George Sputl, was described by Hungarian investigative website Direct36 as having ties to the Russian intelligence services. He is a key figure in spreading what many describe as Russia-friendly narratives, especially regarding the war in Ukraine. His alleged ties to Moscow centre around his link to Colonel Oleg Smirnov, a former military attaché at the Russian embassy in Budapest, believed to be in the GRU, Russia's military intelligence service. According to Direct 36, the broadcaster regularly received topic suggestions and pro-Kremlin talking points from Russian contacts such as Smirnov, which he later repeated in on-air interviews. These included statements blaming the West for the war in Ukraine, claiming Crimea and the Donbass belonged to Russia, and saying that the Kyiv government needed to be denazified. Hungary's foreign minister said in March that he regularly listens to Sportl's podcast. Indeed, the individual has long-standing connections to Hungarian Prime Minister Orbán's ruling party, appearing in campaign events and on sympathetic media outlets where he's presented as an expert on national security. We'll link to that piece in the show notes, further evidence for many of Russian infiltration in the information sphere in Eastern Europe, something we also examined in Moldova, which we visited while en route to Odessa, and you'll be able to hear more about that soon, including our own encounter with pro-Russian politicians. So those are the updates today, but before we turn to our guest, Ukrainian cookery writer Olia Hercules, to whet your appetite, here's a recording we've been saving for you.
Hot pepper.
Oh, wow. I think I took a little bit too much up the nose. It's a very, very, very spicy hot pepper.
Francis and I are standing in the middle of a kitchen in a ground floor office space in Kharkiv.
It smells like basil.
Purple and green basil, so that's why the color are different.
Gosh, that is incredibly strong. Makes me want to have some pasta right now.
It's the end of a long reporting day for us, and we're pretty hungry. But sadly, we've not come here to take a lesson in Ukrainian cuisine. We've come to meet Maryam Yol. She's showing us the different varieties of flavoured salts that she makes here. She's in her early 30s and runs a program called Lawka di Okupacji, or the De-Occupation Shop.
Onion, but I mean green onion.
Yeah, wow, really sweet smelling onion.
And parsley.
Yeah.
Flavoured salt, you say? Yes, we hear your surprise. We're also puzzled. How could such a basic kitchen item help people some 60 kilometers away from the front line get a new start in life? It all started when the war broke out, and Miriam, like so many other Ukrainians, gave up her career to help where she could.
It's when you wake up 24 February and understand that, okay, it's war, it's awful, but let's do something. And we do something 24, 25.
She focused her efforts in the areas that had been liberated from Russian occupation.
What we started to do, it's rebuilding. We rebuilt roofs and windows in villages near Izum. It was so funny that summer when we rebuilt the roof, it was so hot. And the type of mines explode every 25 minutes because of heat, yeah.
This is the heat? The heat would set off the explosives whilst you're working. Crikey.
Reconstruction was crucial, but as the year continued and people in these areas strived to rebuild their lives, their needs also changed.
How did you think of this? It's quite an unusual program that you offer.
Just because they have a basic, they need return normal life.
A lot of these people had been farmers before the war, and they had lost almost everything. So how could they make a living and become financially independent again?
It's not only about selling something or growing something or taking money. It's about activity for mental health.
So Miriam, who worked in advertisement before the war, figured that she could help them find a market for their produce. They now sell the vegetables to restaurants, and they've even got a small shop in central Kharkiv in a trendy food court. Whatever money they make, they give it right back to the farmers.
We buy the vegetables and then we return us the money and then buy the vegetables and then return again and do it. In summer, we sell just vegetables, but now we are in
November,
yeah.
And that brings us back to the flavoured salt, which they make to use up whatever vegetables are left in the winter months.
Are those some of the peppers that you ground down to make the flavour?
Then we blend it. Then we dehydrate.
She's pressing the buttons on this big device. It looks a bit like an oven. Ah, yes, oven trays.
And when we started to do this salt, we sell not only in Kharkiv, we do it all around Ukraine. More people can buy and more money can come back to farmers, and this is a circle.
Now, they give seeds to more than 6,000 farms so that they can grow their own produce. It's a way for them to get back on their feet rather than be dependent on food aid.
We heard from our farmers, oh, thank you for this project. I go to my garden and I do something and I really don't hurt shelling around. They're happy that they have a little money from this. They happy because they do something. And we have really good reactions from other Ukrainians who buy. Why? Because they help us to help them, farmers in this occupation village.
So it's really like a ladder then. So stage 1 was getting immediate emergency medical attention to people. Stage 2 is helping them rebuild, repair, whether it be greenhouses, their homes. And now it's about giving them a livelihood, which is the seed project.
Now we have planned to next summer. Previous one, we have only one shop. Next year, we want to have 2. Now we started producing salt and we want to do it more, and we want to come to little shops and middle and supermarkets.
Mariam tells us that when the area got liberated, the farmers that she works with had to figure it all on their own. Most of them had to demine their land themselves.
How on earth did they even start trying to do that safely?
In Ukraine, in my childhood, we have a TV program, Чумелые ручки.
Mastercraft.
That's Ludmila, our fixer.
It was one program from our childhood that is called how to do something craftily with everything.
They do it with kitchen stuff.
This is a secret recipe how to demine by yourself, but don't do it again, please. And in all circumstances, it is forbidden. So you need to take a long stick and you need to stick to this bar, a casserole. The safety distance between you and this casserole is going to be about 4 meters. And after that, you need to find out this mine, to put this casserole on this mine just to try to dig it out, to take it to safe place. In that case, it was some kind of tree. And when they have collected all of these mines with the help of this casserole, so they needed to stick some kind of rope with the kind of brick. And when you need to stretch it, you need to then ban it or throw, and it's going to be like a big explosion, but you are at safety distance.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't try this at home. Don't tell health and safety either.
If Mariam manages to make light of the situation she's encountered in the last 3 years, it's only ever to cope with the horrors she witnessed.
One woman, when she turned back after the occupation, she found the son in garden. He was almost died. And she tried to call to police and medicine staff to help, but they cannot come.
And when she came back, she found him dead. She had to bury him in their garden near the territory of their house.
Just like many volunteer organizations around the country, Mariam and her colleagues do a little bit of everything. They help where they can, whether that's procuring medicine or clothes for civilians and the army alike.
Now we have 3 rooms. First of all, this one.
There are shelves after shelves of different types of medicine here. Like, there must be hundreds of different types. There's a whole load of walking aids, from crutches to bandages as well. Lots of ointments. It's honestly a doctor's heaven.
Inside her office, the walls and bookshelves are covered in military paraphernalia and keepsakes from different brigades.
We have a lot of thankful from militaries, from brigade which we help. Have a lot of small presents from them too.
So we've got cartridge cases, we've got rocket casings as well.
A lot of type of weapon here in this room.
This looks like a missile that's been exploded and has been opened up since to look inside.
Meals, for example, rations, meals.
Russian MREs. So they are the meals, the food, rations.
Miriam hands us an orange piece of fabric with a sunflower design on it. It almost looks like a drawing by Van Gogh.
Actually, what made it wasn't a deliberate artistic act by a human being, but was just the act of cleaning out a mortar. And in that act of cleaning it out, it's made a pattern that looks like a sunflower. And so it's very unique and obviously symbolic.
Everything is so important for us, but we have one special.
So this is a special certificate from the former Commander-in-Chief, Zaluzhny, to thank you for your work. And what does it say? Can you read it out for me?
Thankful our Charitable Foundation volunteer staff for the active position and helping armed forces. We are together to go into the victory.
And for day-to-day moral support...
Who's this?
Miriam has also got the organisation's pet rabbit.
This is Jimmy,
who's quietly munching on hay in the corner of her office.
He's 7 years old. He was a gift for us.
Does he ever get to try any of the vegetables before they get ground up?
Once our zucchini from village Studenok.
And did he like it?
Yeah, but he more like hay.
Well, sorry, Jimmy. I think it's going to be hay for the rest of the day for you. Oh, and he's eating now. He's eating now. Oh, perfect timing. This might sound like a very simple question, but why? Why do this? There would have been many other things that you could have done. Why did you decide to do this and to experience so much horror?
We do now and we will do. I don't know what, but we really must and will. This is our home. This is our city. I don't know. This is our fields. Our everything is our. With 2 colors of flag, not 3. We need to continue every day, do something. It's not about to do something huge. You need to do something small, but every day.
What do you think about life afterwards? Are you optimistic about the future of your country? Have you had thoughts about what you would like to do afterwards?
I don't know. We'll have vacation. Maybe for...
I think you've earned that. Definitely, I think you've earned that.
Maybe for 6 months. Maybe in Lisbon, for example. I don't know. Without alert and керовані авіабомби.
Bombs, guided bombs.
We are now in Kharkiv, and every minute we can die because of something, I don't know.
You've just handed me a piece of quite heavy, sharp metal. It's obviously a piece of shrapnel from, I'd guess, a missile or a shell of some kind. I mean, it is razor sharp. If that was flying through the air, you wouldn't stand a chance. How did you get it?
It was simple near our office.
Near our office, just in the street?
Yeah, just in the street.
Miriam gifted us the piece of shrapnel, and it now lives on Francis's desk at the Telegraph.
And as somebody who has seen the very worst effects of war on a population, what do you say to those who are talking at the moment about the need for negotiations? Does it feel the right time given how much Ukraine has suffered? Or do you feel that this is still premature?
I understand that when every war ended and we are in this ending process, we need to talk, yeah. But I don't know how. If you know someone who live in occupation, for example, if you heard this story, if you have some in your family, your friend who are military now, if you wait for answer in your WhatsApp of these militaries what you love and he or she didn't answer 1 day, 2 days, 1 week. If you visited funerals of your friends, you cannot say, okay, let it be peace. It's so easy to be pacifistic if you don't have war.
Delighted now to welcome Olia Hercules, friend of the podcast and best-selling cookery writer. Welcome back to Ukraine, the latest, Olia. Always a pleasure to see you. The reason we're speaking to you today is that you've just written a book with a very interesting premise. It's called Strong Roots, a Ukrainian family story through war, exile and hope, and focuses on your own family story across 4 generations, so about 100 years of political upheaval in Ukraine. It goes from the years of Russification to your grandmother's deportation under Stalin, to your aunt's school protests, and to your own parents' flight from Ukraine when their town was occupied in 2022. It's also interwoven with recipes passed down through the generations. It's a fascinating read. We've got a copy here at the paper. I was browsing before we came on air. Perhaps in a moment we can start with the earliest generation and work through them chronologically. But first of all, just want to ask, Olia, why did you want to write this book and why now?
Thank you so much for having me today. Why did I want to write this book? So I come from the south of Ukraine, from Kharkiv, which is still occupied. And not just the south of Ukraine, but the whole of Ukraine has just been this strange, blind spot for a lot of people. And still, it's flabbergasting. How can people not know what's been going on in this huge swath of land bang in the middle of kind of Europe? And I thought that in 2022, time has come to tell my story, to explain to people that the war didn't start 3 years ago. It didn't even start 10 years ago. Oppression from our neighbor has been happening for hundreds of years. And I delved into the wider history, but I also interviewed my family members, and I really wanted to tell their stories, which growing up, listening to my family, talking around the big table, eating, drinking, especially in the 80s and the 90s when my grandparents started opening up. The stories were outlandish. You thought it sounds like a movie. They're like gothic fairy tales. And they have so much truth. And of course, it's a unique family story, but it's also representative of millions of stories of Ukrainians. And I was really keen to tell the world, to help them understand why what's happening now is happening.
Well, let's go through some of those generations in your family. Where do you want to start in terms of the earliest generation you cover?
So I think I would like to start with the birth of my grandmother, Lucia, my mom's mom, who was born in 1921 in June. Her birthday is next week. And she was born in Bessarabia, in the south of Ukraine, which is now Mykolaiv region. And she was actually born into the first Holodomor. We know about the forced starvation that the Soviets have imposed on Ukrainians and actually other nations within the Soviet Union. And we always talk about the 1930s event. But actually there were 3 occasions. So the first one was in the early 1920s when I think there was another bad harvest, but the Soviets have taken all of the grain and any kind of bread or anything that people have saved for themselves, and people starved. So she was born into that. Then followed a little of a loosening, kind of 1920s were a little bit freer with NEP, and Lenin kind of introduced this policy of Ukrainianization, so language was allowed and writers were writing in Ukrainian. There was a really big flurry of Ukrainian culture springing up. And then, of course, Stalin in the 30s has put it down. So my grandmother has lived through all of that, including when she was deported in the early 1930s. She was a daughter of a farmer, of a kurkul. They called him a wealthy farmer. He wasn't really. He just had a couple of fields, and they took their house, they took their cow, they took their land, and they put him into prison, and they've sent my grandma and her siblings, altogether 7 children, and her mum, they put her into a cattle train. And in the middle of winter, they've sent her to Vologda, which is Russia and the border with Karelia at that point. And they just stopped in the middle of the night, and they just threw them out of the train into a dark forest in the middle of winter to die, basically. And apart from one of her brothers, they managed to survive and to actually even come back to Ukraine in the 1930s. So that's where kind of the story begins.
And you were talking about the way in which food was integral to hearing these stories. I mean, what kind of cuisine? I'm imagining that, it's very, very simple given what your family suffered. But what kind of cuisine was a staple at that time?
Oh, at that time, they have been able to grow vegetables, even after coming back. And even when the Soviets introduced this draconian tax in 1947, a tax on trees and tax on animals, again, to destroy people's livelihoods.
This was, as you say, the liquidization of a whole class of people.
Exactly.
Because of the ideology of the Soviets.
Exactly. So if you grew vegetables, you survived. If you had a cow, you survived. So I'd imagine the food was, as you say, a lot of homegrown vegetables, a lot of preserves. But from my grandmother's stories, during those famines, she made korzyki, which was, I would imagine, a flatbread, but a very, very simple flatbread, whatever you could find, maybe flour mixed with something else to bulk it up and some water. And she would make them in the morning, and that's what they would all eat during the day. And there was a story actually of going back to 1947, my grandma would pack one of these flatbreads and give it to my grandfather Victor, who was working as a driver for a veterinarian in Voznesensk in Mykolaiv region. She would pack this flatbread for him, and then she noticed that he would come back home and just faint. He actually fainted once, and then she grilled him and she said, "What's happening? Why are you fainting?" And apparently he was taking it, and he would see older people and children basically starving on the streets, and he would just give it to them, so he went hungry. So the food in those kind of periods was extremely simple, and people just tried to survive, did foraging and everything else that you needed to do. And then as time passed and they were able to grow again in the late 1950s and 60s, the food became, as good as it gets in the Soviet Union, I guess. They never ate in the canteen, in the Soviet canteen. They were living in the countryside, and they grew incredible vegetables, etc. So luckily, some of those recipes that my grandmother would have learned from her mom, who was an amazing cook, they did survive. And to us, I think, to Ukrainians, we don't have heirlooms, we don't have jewelry, we don't have rugs or family trees or anything like that. We didn't have those possessions. So for us, I feel the treasure was all of this information about food and recipes and family stories. That's our heirloom.
And if we move forward then from the deportation and the sort of recovery that you've just described into the next generation, tell us about your aunt.
So my grandmother, Lucia, had 6 children. Very big age gaps, obviously, between my mom, who is the youngest, and her older sister, 12 years difference. And for my grandmother, it was extremely important to give everyone education. She only had 3 years of school before she was deported, etc. But it was her life's mission to make sure that everybody went to university, which wasn't actually the easiest thing to do. A lot of people say, in Soviet Union, everyone had this amazing education. It's like, no, you had to bribe people to get into university, or you had to have connections or whatever. But she made sure that they studied well, and she wanted them to have proper professions, so teachers, doctors, etc. And she managed. Apart from one rogue brother who was very free-thinking and didn't do that, Zhenya became a teacher. So she became a teacher, and I think in the 60s she wasn't actively involved in the kind of dissident movement or anything like that, but she was very interested in it on a kind of clandestine level. But by the time that I went to school in the late 80s, like early 90s, she was actually my primary teacher. So she taught me, she taught my brother, she taught my cousins. We all went to this school number 2 in Kakhovka. So primary teacher, but she was so headstrong. I started my second year of school when 6 months before Ukraine officially gained independence. And I will never forget this scene that I witnessed in my schoolyard. I came out for lunch, whatever, and I was just standing there, and then I saw my Aunt Zhenya standing next to the headmaster, and I tuned into their conversation, and she said, my children, so her class, including me, they will never become Oktyabrята. For those who don't know, Oktyabrята was like a little pioneers, so a little youth groups where they indoctrinate you and you have to train you to become this amazing Soviet citizen. And you wear this red kerchief, etc. But she said to my headmaster, it's all over. It's coming to an end. I know that in December, when we have the referendum that will determine whether Ukraine goes independent or not, I know that it's going to happen, and there's no way that my children are going to be in this group. And I was listening, she was almost stomping her foot. I'm sure she didn't, but that's what it felt like. And I was watching her in amazement, and I just thought, wow. On the one hand, I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be an Oktyabrята. I'm not going to have this kerchief and the responsibility and everything that I thought was really important, or everything that we saw in books or etc. And on the other hand, I thought, wow, she's so strong and she's really kicking.
What did the head teacher say?
He cowered and he tried the arguments. He was a very tall but very softly spoken man, and he just said, oh, but the opposite class teacher, she's doing it. And she's like, well, she can fall off a cliff if she wants to. I'm not doing it. So she relented, and I never became an Oktyabryonak.
Wow. And she was right in terms of predicting the direction of travel. And I think what's fascinating hearing your description of your family history here is that it breathes life into these what sometimes can just be abstract dates that we talk about. And of course, the tragedy is that history endures because your own family had to leave the territory in Ukraine after the full-scale invasion. So let's move into that generation then.
Yeah, so mom and dad have been living in Kakhovka since the early 80s. They settled there. In the past 35 years, they've built a beautiful house and planted an orchard, etc. And in 2022, the Russian tanks rolled in and it all changed. And they tried to protest. They went out and they said, we're not going anywhere. This is our home, and we'll just bat them off somehow. And then after Bucha, my dad received a phone call from a Russian who said, we know your son has taken up arms. He's in the territorial army. Tell him to put down arms or else, basically threatening him to take him to the basement, to the torture chambers. So I convinced my parents to leave. And that was kind of a story in its own, and it's in the book. But they managed to escape together with my extended family and some friends. And unfortunately, some people still remain. And Kakhovka remains occupied. And from what we know, FSB officers have moved into my parents' beautiful home. Yeah. So that's the story.
We know that we are listened to by people in the occupied territories. What would you say to them?
Please don't lose hope and know that we're fighting for you in whatever way we can. My brother is fighting in an actual sense. He's still in the territorial defense, and I'm fighting with my pen and with my voice, and I will never, ever, ever give up. So please hold on and wait for us.
Thanks, Olia. A couple more, if I may. Historically, and I don't know if this is increased as an activity in recent years, but historically, how has Russia weaponized food and the associated culture?
Well, there was a whole policy of standardization in the Soviet Union. So people were, of course, removed from their land and their homes. A lot of them were encouraged to move into urban spaces and into these horrific Khrushchevka tower blocks. So that removal from their land and growing was one step. Another, going back to the standardization policy, where the Soviets said, well, every nation can have one dish, but we'll create the standard recipe. So Ukraine was given borscht, and Central Asia plov, etc., etc. And they created this really horrific one recipe, and they said, this is it. And this is what was cooked in the canteen. And it was a badly devised economic recipe anyway, and you can imagine everything watered down in those canteens. So, and I've seen the reports as well that in Romania back in the day, people in villages would be encouraged to bring their home-written cookbooks, their diaries where they would have all the recipes and put them into a bonfire. Reportedly, people obviously faked it and put the wrong things in to burn. But there's been so much, and I think urban areas in particular suffered. All of those people that lived in collective apartments, kommunalkas, or people that lived in the Khrushchevka buildings, etc., losing that connection to the soil, but also just general eradication of Ukrainians, killing of more than 3 million Ukrainians during Holodomor. How much knowledge has disappeared with that? And then from the 50s, 60s, etc., there was another policy, I can't remember the exact name, but the idea was to conquer nature. Stalin wanted to conquer nature, so he started building dams and destroying the local environment. In the north of Ukraine, he was trying to dry out all of these natural marshes and bogs, killing all of these forests. So as you kill environment, you're also, again, killing people's livelihoods. And I think this connection, it shouldn't be overlooked. And if people can educate themselves and read up a little bit about how much damage the Soviet Union has done to the environment in Ukraine and what effect it has had, a knock-on effect, they would be shocked. And they're still doing it.
Were your parents at home when the Novokhovka Dam was destroyed?
No, they were already gone, and that was a complete catastrophe. So many people's villages were flooded, and luckily my parents' house is in Old Kakhovka, so in fact they were by the reservoir water of Dnipro, but after the flood the water actually retreated to the original banks of the river. So now instead of a river, apparently there is a weeping willow forest. So at least nature is fighting back. Some good news.
And just finally for me, having seen Francis struggle through a few menus last week in Odessa, should you always have meat in borscht?
No, absolutely not. You can have vegan borscht. Quite naturally, back in the day, before religion was suppressed as well, people would be fasting before Easter, for example. Or if you're keeping animals, you're not going to kill a chicken every day. That's just not sustainable. So actually, a vegan or vegetarian borscht is definitely a thing all over Ukraine. So I think because of the, starvation that we've suffered, as soon as there was meat available, people were just like, meat, but it's not necessarily a traditional thing.
Well, thank you for that. That was a debate that Dom and I were having whilst we were in Odessa, so you've answered that for us.
I hope that settled it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Olia, for your time, and I'll come to you in a moment for your final thoughts. And actually, it would be really interesting to hear an update on Cook for Ukraine, which, of course, you co-founded. But if you could just bear with us 1 second. Dom, where do you want to leave listeners?
Thanks, Francis. I've got two connected. Let's go back to the attacks last night, Israel attack on Iran. I think Israel probably decided now was the best window of opportunity for such an attack. I think this timing would have been dictated by a weak and weakened Hezbollah and Hamas, a distracted Trump, and Israel's proven ability to shoot down Iranian drones, with some help from their friends, and also their ability to penetrate Iran's air defences. I note, for example, Justin Bronk, our friend from Russia, he tweeted this morning that as many of the jets in the Israeli Air Force footage carried 2,000-pound GBU-31 JDAMs, the Joint Direct Attack Munition. He says it suggests Israel had established sufficient control of the air to operate directly over Tehran and Natanz without relying on standoff weapons. I thought it was quite an interesting quote. Anyway, so I think now is a window of opportunity. But that idea, the window of opportunity idea, worries me because with a bored Trump and a lethargic Europe racing, quote unquote, to rearm, and I would point folk to Joe's article on that European defence industry programme and the spat around it, might Putin now feel it's a good time to test Article 5 with maybe a little provocation in the Baltics? Might China, for example, see now as a good time to press to test on Taiwan? Is this window of opportunity? Don't wait until you're 100% ready to go. Don't let excellent be the enemy of very good, for example. I wonder if some of these characters are thinking, let's have a little go. And my second thought is I note today, with a wry smile, that Russia has condemned Israel's attack on Iran as, quote, an unprovoked aggression. They've called it a dangerous escalation that violated the United Nations Charter and international law. Russia's foreign ministry said the international community, quote, cannot remain indifferent to such actions. Stop sniggering at the back. Now, on the face of it, they are just trolling us. They're just laughing at those of us paying attention. But I don't think that we're their audience for this kind of messaging. They are trying to speak past us to the millions, perhaps billions around the world who don't follow the war in Ukraine, who don't really have any view on Ukraine or issues of sovereignty, legality, humanity, anything like this. I think this call by Russia's foreign ministry will be amplified through their embassies around the world in a bid to establish themselves as responsible global actors, decent human beings, etc., etc. They are playing the long game of misinformation and distraction and reflection, of course, reflection being accuse others what you are doing, so that any criticism can be written off as whataboutery. So I just ask you, when you hear these pronouncements, I urge you, do go and have a look at this Russian foreign ministry thing, just for for laughs, if nothing else. But when you hear these pronouncements, I urge you not to get mad, but to see once again Russian fear, see their lies and see their duplicity in action. And without, if possible, without becoming that boring person at the party with only one really earnest thing to say, if the opportunity comes up, just point out to anyone willing to listen, point out these nonsensical statements which, in the hands of someone like you, someone calm, empathetic, capable of rational thought, will say so much more than the Russian Foreign Ministry would want them to. So do go and have a look.
Well, thanks very much, Dom. Just before I go to Olia for the very final thought of the week, just a very brief one from me. Wanted to flag 2 live events that we're doing over the next few weeks. We'd love to see you there. We did both with David last year, and we thought it was important to do so again, and we're very touched to be invited. The first is on Friday the 27th of June, so this month, at Chalke History Festival in Wiltshire, where Dom, Adley and I will be sharing a stage with Nobel Peace Prize winner Alexandra Matvichuk, who you heard on the podcast yesterday. We met many of you at the event last year, both on stage and at the bar afterwards, and of course it would be lovely to do so again. The second is Scarborough Fair in the north of England on the 9th of July, where again the 3 of us will be reflecting on 3 years of war, and we'll add a link in the show notes to both of those events, and as I say, look forward to seeing as many of you there as possible. But Olia, as our guest, where do you want to leave our listeners at the end of another historic week?
It's very important to me that people realize that all of what we call occupied territories are not territories, if that makes sense. They're not just a dot on a map. It's language that kind of dehumanizes everyone who remains there, and as you said, who is waiting or who is listening to this podcast. And through my book, Strong Roots, I'm hoping that that message is carried through and that people don't look at the peace talks or whatever is going to happen and say, oh, just give up some territories. They're not territories. They're people, they're our memories, they're our histories. Our grandparents are buried there. Our beautiful nature and land is there, and it's suffering. So I just really urge people to understand that and to carry that message on for us.
And what's the latest on Cook for Ukraine?
It's a thing of its own now, which is amazing. Of course it has slowed down. It's not such a massive kind of action as it was at the beginning, but I still see people saying, I've cooked Ukrainian food, or I've taught someone a recipe, or I've just been talking about Ukraine. Even you don't even have to do like this massive action or a big fundraising dinner. Just if people keep learning, keep cooking and sharing with their loved ones, it's a good thing.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Dom, Nicholls and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine Live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells and David Knowles.
My name is David Knowles. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.